Okay. Night shiur, as always, Lili Nishma of Marido, Ber Meridun Halevi, even Marti Rochel Bat Harav Michael. And this Shabbat, we have a privilege this Shabbat because it happens to be a leap year that we are going to read Tetzaveh. We're actually going to read the Haftorah of Tetzaveh, which rarely gets read during a regular year, almost always gets read during a leap year. And as a result, it's not the Shabbos for Purim. I mean, it's the Shabbos of Purim, but it's both Purim Katan. So since we're not reading Megillah Esther, we're going to actually talk about parshat Tetzaveh tonight. I give a very brief overview of the parshat Tetzaveh. It's really the companion parsha to parshat Truma. Truma talks about the Mishkan, the construction of the Mishkan, the construction of virtually all of the utensils that are used in the Mishkan. However, there are two exceptions. One we're going to read about in this week's parsha. The other we're going to read about not until next week's parsha. We're going to focus actually on that part that we read tonight. But the bulk of the parsha of Tetzaveh deals with the garments of the Kohanim and the initiation of the Kohanim. That's the bulk of the parsha. The last aliyah, the last 10 psukim, which is what we're going to talk about tonight, deals with a piece of furniture that appears in the Mishkan, the Mizbach Haketoret, and appears here rather than in last week's parsha, even though when we get to Parshat Vayakhel and the actual building, it is mentioned together with all the other stuff in Parshat Truma. So we're going to see what the parsha have to say about that, and we're going to talk a little bit about the Mizbach Haketoret itself. So let's start by going to the psukim themselves, and here we go. Okay. So as I said, this is the 7th aliyah, the last aliyah in Tetzaveh, and we are focusing, as I said, entirely on the last 10 psukim of the parsha. It's Perek Lamed, chapter 30 in Sefer Shemot, and it is.
But I walked to Kaiser this morning, and then I walked to Tehran this afternoon.
Rita, please mute. We can hear you. Thank you. Okay. The Asi, the parsha, the section begins with the Asi. That means Mizbeach Miktar Ketoret. You shall make an altar for the offering of incense. Atzei shitim taseoto. It is made, should be made of shittim wood. Amah or kovi amah rachbo ravua yihyeh. Its floor space is 1 amah wide, 1 amah long. Ravua yihyeh has to be obviously square if it's 1 amah in each direction. V'amatayim komato, height of 2 amot. Mimenu karnotov, and from it come the corners are raised, or karnotov meaning the corners are formed separately or extra. They extend from the 2 amot. The tipito tos of Torah should be coated with solid gold. Gago, its roof. The kirotov, its walls. Saviv, that go around it. Vet karnotov, as well as the corner projections. The asitalos there's of Saviv, it should have a crown of gold around it, or a border of gold around it, depending on how you translate there. I would translate there a group of flowers around it, right? Nice flower thing. It's modern Hebrew. Ushtei tavot zahav, 2 rings of gold. You should make for me tachat lizero, beneath this the crown or the border should have, beneath that there should be 2 rings. Tasal shnei tzida al shnei talotov, on the 2 corners. Tasal shnei tzidav, you should make on the 2 sides. They shall be as housings for the poles. The poles will be which you carry it with. Then you should make the poles also of shittim wood. They should be coated with gold. It should be placed before the parochet, asher al aron weidut, which is in front of the aron, which separates, as we've seen in the parsha of Truma when we discussed the construction of Mishkan, that the parochet separates between the kodesh and the kodesh HaKodashim. Lifnei HaKaporet, the Mizbach Haketoret is before the kaporet. It is centrally located in the kodesh, asher al weidut, which is upon the testimony, the aron, asher oivei lefashama, and it is at the Aron where Hashem says to Moshe that he will appear to you. V'tir alav, and upon this Mizbeach that we are building for Ketoret, the Aron should offer Ketoret Samim, an offering of spices. Baboker, every morning, Beitivoet Hanirot, when he prepares the candles, Yaktireno, he should light it. Uvalot Aaron et Hanirot ben Orboim Yaktireno, and similarly, when Aaron lights the candles in the afternoon, he should also bring an offering of Ketoret. Ketoret Tamid Lifnei Hashem L'Dorotechem. It should be an eternal Ketoret or a regular Ketoret Lifnei Hashem, before Hashem, for all of your generations. Lo talu alav Ketoret zara. You may not bring upon this altar any strange Ketoret, the ola or mincha, or any burnt offering or any meal offering. The nesach lo tispola. No wine libations may be poured on this altar. So in other words, basically, this altar has one purpose. It is for spices. Unlike the outer Mizbach, which we read about in last week's parsha, which was used for all of these things that we just listed. And Ola, Mincha, Nesach, all were offerings that were brought on the outer Mizbeach. However, there's one thing that they have in common, that both are used for sprinkling of blood. Generally, the outer one is used for sprinkling of blood. However, once a year, Aaron should achieve atonement upon its corners, the projections of this Mizbech once a year, and that is when? Midam Chatat HaKippurim, from the blood of the sin offering that is brought on Yom Kippur. Achat Bashana Yechaper Olav L'Dorotechem. Once a year, Aaron has to sprinkle blood on this outer Mizbech on Yom Kippur. Once a year, Aaron should achieve atonement for you and for all of your generations. Obviously, it's not going to be Aaron; it's going to be whoever stands in his stead as the Kohen Gadol. Kodesh Kodashim Hu Hashem. This Mizbeach is Kodesh, is holy of holies to Hashem, and that's the entire portion. Now, a couple of questions that we're going to raise, obviously, are firstly, what does it look like? What is the construction thereof? How does it work? And secondly, why isn't this parsha, with all the other pieces of the Mishkan, where it belongs? Why is it out of place here? So those are two things I hope we're going to get to tonight. And of course, I'm going to, as I said, I'm going to digress like I did last week to share some pictorials that I hope will help us get a little bit of understanding of what this Mizbeach looks like. This is the art scroll, very simple schematic diagram. Is it up there yet? It's up there. Okay. Notice, as I said, it's twice the height of the width and length are 1 by 1. It's a square. If you look at from an aerial view, you'll see it's a square, 1 amma by 1 amma, with 4 corner projections extending therefrom. The height is 2 amot, twice the length and the width. And now you'll notice here you've got 2 poles to carry it with. Okay, but notice each of the poles is running at a diagonal. It runs diagonal to the corner. Does not run along the side of the Mizbeach. All of the other furniture has 2 rings holding each pole have 2 rings holding it. Both the Shulchan, the Mizbeach and the Aron have 2 poles that are held. Each pole is held by 2 rings. Notice here, the pole is only held by 1 ring in this drawing. By the way, that's one opinion, obviously. Guess what? There's another opinion, okay, which we're going to see in a minute. But I want to point out also, you'll see the little projections from the top right here that the arrow is going. That's the Zer. That's the crown. You'll see the little pieces here, the crown, the corners, the projections from the top, and the poles. That's really the whole thing. Again, as I said, different than, at least from this picture, it's different than all the other pieces of furniture where the poles are held by 2 pieces. Now, let's go to the bottom here. Here we see this, the bottom one is very, very similar, except it's a color picture and it's a little more 3D than the art scroll picture we just saw. Again, notice the poles run across the corner and are attached by a single ring. Okay, each of the poles, front and back, rather than running along the side. They run along the corner, and that's the way it was. The area up here between inside the Zer, inside the crown, is where the offering was brought. And you'll notice that this has a top. Unlike the outer Mizbech, which was only a hollow frame, this has a top. This is a solid piece that has a top, and as it says, gago, the roof. It has the roof, and that is where the actual Ketoret is brought. So we're going to try to speak on all of those different things. But if we go to the top picture here, you will notice there's another opinion, that each of the poles is not run across the corner. It does run along the side and is held in place by two rings, one at either end. So again, difference of opinion as to how we translate al shnei tzalotov, al shnei tzidav, whether those are both referring to the same two rings or they're referring to two pairs of rings. That's what the Parshanim differ on. As I said, we've got Rashi who seems to imply, at least according to some of the commentaries, that there are two rings holding each pole, as opposed to Rambam, who seems to imply that there is one ring holding each pole. Okay, so we'll go back now to the wording and continue here. Okay, so at this point, as usually, we'll start with Rashi. Now, Rashi first gives us very simply, tells us that Mizbach Haketoret, what is the purpose of this altar? Lahalot alav kitur ashan samim. The purpose is that when I bring something, I'm going to burn something on it that is going to cause a cloud of samim to rise. The primary end result here is smoke from the Ketoret going up from the altar straight. Again, we said, I talked about the roof at Gago. It has a roof. Now, Zeh Hayalo Gad, this altar, as I said, had a roof. Av Mizbach Ola Lo Hayalo Gad. The outer altar where all the offerings were brought did not have a roof. The copper Mizbach does not have a roof. It's 4 side panels. That's the whole thing. You assemble it. And Ella, so if that's the case, wait a minute, if it's hollow, how did I bring offerings and put animals on it to burn? Ella mimalim chalo alo adama b'chol chaniyatam. Whenever they would stop, they would have to make a mound of earth, and that earth would be flattened on top. They would put the 4 panels around it, and that was how the Mizbach, outer Mizbach worked. It was not a piece that was a solid rectangular prism. It was 4 walls. That was it. It was 4 two-dimensional walls that were assembled in a square, and they filled the inner part with dirt. Okay. Rashi mentions that here we have 3 pieces of furniture that have a crown, and Rashi says each of them are symbolic of something. The one around the Aron is symbolic of the Keter of Torah. The one around the Shulchan is symbolic of Keter Malchut, and this one, which is around the Mizbech HaZahav, is Simanu Keter Kehuna, is symbolic of the crown of the Kohanim. So those are the 3 different crowns. Now Rashi says here, Tzalotav kan ulashon zaviyot. Tzalotav here means sides, corners. It's really, Tzalot means corner. Ketargumo, as Onkelos translated, Lefi shenemar al shnei tzidav, because since it says on the 2 sides, so Rashi translates that Tzalot means the 2 corners. So each of the 2 corners of each of the sides, the end of each of the 2 sides, the word corners, al sheitav shnei tzadav. So therefore we had 4 different rings, at least that's what Rashi seems to imply, that each of the poles was held in place by 2 rings. And the purpose of all of these rings was levatim levadim l'chol bayit hiya atabat levad. So each house, each one had 1 ring. Each ring was to hold one of the poles in place. The location of the Mizbech was lifnei parochet. Shema tomar mishoch bikeneged arol tzafon olidarom. I might think that it was off center. We know that when I walked into the Mishkan, when I looked on my right, I'm walking east to west. So when I looked on my right to the north, I would have seen the Shulchan with the Lechem HaPanim. On the right, on the left side, I would have seen the menorah, but right between them, but not as far back, closer to me, I would see this Mizbeach. That was where it was located. In other words, it was straight in the middle, literally right in front of the Aron, but not right in front next to the Prochet. It was up further. It was about halfway between the entrance and the Prochet, whereas the Shulchan and the Menorah were almost adjacent to the Prochet. They were not right on top of it, but they were in the back quarter of the room, whereas this Mizbach was halfway into the room. So it was pulled further, closer to the person entering than the other two pieces of furniture that were in this room. Okay. Okay. All right. Again, we said the chiper Aharon. Aaron is to bring a blood. Only time we sprinkle blood on this mizbech is achat b'shana b'yom kippurim, once a year on Yom Kippur, as we read about in parshat Achremot in the whole seder of the avodah of Yom Kippur, that the kohen v'yatzal mizbech asher lifnei Hashem l'chiper olav. He should exit till when he leaves the Kodesh Kodashim, he goes to the Mizbeach that is before Hashem, i.e. the Mizbach Haketoret, and he sprinkles blood on it. That's the only time during the year, and it is both the blood, the dam of the two offerings that are brought on Yom Kippur, the par and the sa'ir, whose blood is sprinkled in the Kodesh Kodashim. That blood is also sprinkled, offered on the Mizbach Haketoret as a kapara. And again, what does it mean, Kodesh Kodashim? Rashi simply says that the Mizbeach Mikudash Lidvarim Halalu Bilvad V'lo Avodat Acheret. That the entire reason this Mizbeach is there is for bringing Ketoret and for the once a year sprinkling of the blood. That is it. You may not do any other avodah. No voluntary offerings can be brought on this. Nothing else can be brought on this except the required Ketoret that's brought every day, and the Ketoret that's brought on Yom Kippur, and the blood that is sprinkled on Yom Kippur. That's it. Okay, that's the Canaan. Now we're going to, as I said, we're going to go back to the different opinions regarding the poles. Al Shnei Tzidav. Perish Rashi. Those are the first quotes Rashi says, Shnei Zaviyotov Asher Shnei Tzidav L'chora Hainu Arba Tabaot. Seems that Rashi is implying that each of the two corners, each of the two corners on each side of the Mizbeach had a ring on it, which means there were a total of 4 rings, which seems to imply that you need 2 rings on each to hold the pole, and that the poles went along the side of the Mizbeach. The Tema, Tosfos asks the question, Shari Mizbeach zeh lo haya ki'im ama arkovi ama rachbo. The entire size of this Mizbeach is only 1 amma. About the size of this computer, probably, in terms of length and width. That may be a little bit wider here, but that's it. Now, if I put 2 poles there, we know that when the poles were put in for example, in the Aron, each person, there were 4 people who would carry the Aron. The 4 people would all be facing the Aron, not facing back. So 2 of the people were walking backwards, 2 of the people were walking forwards, but they were all standing outside the Aron, so that there was room for each one to put on one of their shoulders to put a pole. Now here, the fact is this whole thing is only 1 amma. So if I put one on my shoulder and you're standing next to me, you put the other one on your shoulder, we're not going to have enough room to walk. Okay? No. It's transported in one piece. That's exactly when you put the poles in. The only piece of furniture that had the poles in all the time is the Ark, the Aron. Every other piece of furniture, the poles are put in specifically to carry it. It's not broken apart. The poles are put in there to help you carry it. Okay, so Tosfos' question is very simple. If this whole thing is only 1 amma wide, and you're going to have 2 people holding up these 2 poles on either side, there's not going to be enough room. There just physically is not enough room for them both to fit. Because again, if I put one on my shoulder, you're standing next to me with one on your shoulder, there's going to be more than an amma there has to be more than an amma between the 2 poles. Because you think about it, if I stretch my hand out to here, I'll be crashing into you, and you'll be crashing into me. So there's not enough room for us to walk side by side with this piece of furniture between us. The imkain hecha avru trei gavre. How can 2 people stand be amma chada in 1 amma? 2 people can't stand in the same space. That's why we had to explain that the Aron the tabot were along the length side, not along the width side, because if they had been along the width side, there wouldn't have been enough room for the people to stand. And certainly, if they couldn't fit in an amma and a half width of the aron, they certainly can't fit two people in the amma width of the mizbeach. The tzarich lomar, and that's why he said, Adam. There were two people carrying it. Echad lechol tzad. So we have to say, according to Rashi, the way this was carried is not like every other piece. The other piece of furniture all had four people carrying two poles. This one had two people carrying two poles, and they put the two poles on the two shoulders, so that this amma is the distance between your two shoulders. So the Mizbeach was sitting on the two shoulders of the two people, but each one had a full pole. So again, he's explaining Rashi's explanation that there are two poles works, but it only works if you have only two people carrying the Mizbeach, not four. Ramban is going to go in. Now that's enough for the poles. Now we're going to go back to the basic question. Why is this chapter not included in last week's parsha? Why is it here after everything's been discussed about the Mishkan, everything's been discussed about the Kohanim and their initiation and everything, and now all of a sudden, we suddenly come up with this new piece of furniture. Mizbach Haketoret. Ramban says, Mizbach Haketoret. It's one of the pieces that goes inside the inside the building, inside the krashim. It should have been mentioned right after we mentioned make the shulchan, make the menorah. The next thing we should have said is make the Mizbeach HaZahav, because we're working our way outside. We started with the aron, then we talked about the next thing is the Mizbeach, the shulchan and the menorah. And now the next piece of furniture you'd meet theoretically if you were walking out from the Kodesh Kodashim is the Mizbeach. Why isn't it there? V'chein, and not only to make the question even more, v'chein yishkir masev parshat vayakel. When they're built, that's the order that mentions them. The reason it's mentioned here, after it goes through all of the Mishkan and all of the garments of the Kohanim and all of the offerings that are to be brought on a daily basis, at the end of all of that, it says, Hashem says, I will become sanctified with you. The Mishkan is there to sanctify the honor of Hashem. Hashem is sanctified through the honor we give him in the Mishkan. And similarly, V'shachanti b'toch b'nei Yisrael. Hashem says, I should dwell in the midst of b'nei Yisrael. Amar, ki od yitchayev lahem shiyasu mizbeach hakmiktar ketoret laktir l'chvod Hashem. So after Hashem comes and rests his presence and gives us this honor, we now have to offer ketoret to honor Hashem. So the whole purpose of the ketoret is not like everything else in order to create the awe of Hashem. It's now our giving back, saying, okay, Hashem, since you've come to visit, we are going to bring this ketoret. And this is the hint that was given, or the secret thing that was given to Moshe Rabbeinu, Shaketoret Otzeret Hamagefa. That we know in Parshat Korach, there is a plague. Moshe says to Aaron, take a pan, bring some ketoret, go out to where the plague is happening, and the plague will stop. And that's exactly what happens. How did Moshe know that? The Ramban wants to bring the Midrash here, that Moshe knew it from here. He had ketoret b'midat hadin. Ketoret is something that represents midat hadin, or it counteracts midat hadin. Shenemar yosimu ketorah v'apecha. You should put ketoret against your anger. Mean chara api. From again, v'apecha means my anger. V'hu mash amar b'ketoret zara. That's why it says concerning ketoret zara, when somebody brings ketoret that is inappropriate. I'll call Panea ekaved. Hashem says to Aaron, or Moshe says to Aaron, that Hashem said that I will become honored in front of all of the people, and that is through the offering of the ketoret. Shedu kivodi, that they will understand how great my honor is. He lo yis'al afi shachem, because I will not, when it comes to ketoret, Hashem will not forgive a sin committed with the Ketoret. These Harobi Chlodi, and they will be very careful and very wary about giving proper honor to Hashem. So the whole purpose of the Ketoret is to give proper honor to Hashem, not like the rest of the Mishkan, whose purpose is V'shachanti b'tocham, that Hashem should come and dwell in our midst. But Ramban wants to say that the Ketoret is not part of that whole rationale of the Mishkan of Hashem coming to dwell in our midst. It's a completely opposite. It's once Hashem has come, we have to now give him the proper respect and honor. Kach Amar Kan v'natato tolifnei haparochet asher l'renut l'nei hakaporet asher v'eid l'chashama. Why Ramban wants to? Why does it have to say all this? We know exactly where the mizbeach is already. All it say l'fnei haparochet. Why shall l'renut l'fnei hakaporet asher l'edut? Why is all this? Kima tzorech larich b'chol eila. Why did it need all of this excess language? Why didn't it just say put it in front of your own, period? This is to teach us what its purpose is. The purpose of the Mizbach Haketoret is so that by bringing the Ketoret, we will make sure that we are very careful that we only bring the appropriate Ketoret, and that will give great honor to Hashem. So that's Ramban's reason why it's not listed among all the rest of the Kelim. Sforno. Okay. Sforno firstly says that this is again different than the outer altar, the outer mizbeach, which we knew was filled with dirt. This mizbeach only needs a little bit of fire, a little bit of heat. It's not that there's a constant, huge, large fire going to burn all the animal sacrifices like outside. Therefore, it will not be required to be hollow and filled with earth like the outer mizbeach was. The outer mizbeach had to be filled with earth because it needed a basis for the fire. And if it was just a wooden piece of furniture, you can't have a fire on a wooden piece of wooden furniture. It doesn't quite work. Okay, but he's saying that here, in the outer mizbeach, there was so much fire, we needed a earthen-based platform to offer it on. But here, even though there was a very thin layer of gold, it was enough because it was not that hot. Not get that hot. It wasn't burning constantly. It was only burnt twice a day, and therefore it's a different construction, and that's exactly what Sforno was explaining. And since it was only a low fire and a small amount, it was not enough to melt the gold off so that it wouldn't get to the wood and burn the wood. So even though this mizbeach was made of wood, just like the other mizbeach was, the fact that it had a gold top coating on top and it did not have the same level of heat and fire was enough to keep it going. Okay. Now we get to the same question that Ramban asked. Why isn't this one in the same place as everything else? Very similar answer to Ramban, that the purpose of this Mizbeach is not that Hashem is coming to dwell in our midst. All of the rest of the Mizbeach, the purpose is to cause Hashem to dwell in our midst. Okay? Aval. But he disagrees with Ramban a little bit. He says the purpose here is not to show the honor of Hashem. It's not for us to show the honor of Hashem. However, what the purpose is, the purpose of this Mizbeach is to give honor to Hashem after he has already come to accept all the other korbanot. It's not simultaneous. It's after the fact that we've brought all these other korbanot on the outer Mizbeach to bring Hashem into our midst. Now we want to give Torah to honor Hashem. And that's what Sforno says is the reason. To offer, to grace Hashem's presence with the Mincha of the Ketoret. Al derech havul Hashem kivod shema. We should give Hashem the honor and respect to His name. Therefore, su'min chol v'lefana. Okay. Shtei tzalzav power hagova. Shtei tzadav, he says tzidei arochav. Again, there were the far seems to imply that there were also four rings for the poles. And then we go to Bechor Shor. What is the purpose of the Mizbach Haketoret? Bechor Shor answers very simply: L'aktir olav Ketoret. The purpose is to bring Ketoret. Malchuta dishmaya ein malchuta da'ara. Sforno says Bechor Shor brings down a very interesting phrase that the heavenly kingdom is similar in some ways to the earthly kingdom. Just like ordinary kings do. What do? They bring mukbar. They bring some type of incense, perfume, spices, levosem, to make things smell nice. So too, we bring the Ketoret to make it smell nice. And mukmar karov yoter. So again, the Mizbeach, which is outside the Mizbeach Ha'olah, is like the slaughterhouse, where the king's all the food is prepared. And the shulchan, the menorah, are generally further away from the slaughterhouse and closer to where the king is going to eat. So therefore, all of these things everything is different, and that's why the location, of course, I want to say that's why the layout of the Mishkan is the way it is, because the things that are less kavod are further away. Things that are more kavod are closer in. We should not think that HaKadosh Baruch Hu needs any of this. Hashem owns everything. What I don't need anything. What can Hashem need? Ella, why do we have all of this stuff, including the Ketores? What's the purpose of primarily the Ketores? Ella shakadosh baruch hu chafetz latzdik Yisrael. Hashem wanted to give us opportunities to gain merit, to become tzaddikim. K'mosh amru chachamim, as we said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'zak Yisrael l'fikoch hil Torah mitzvah. Hashem wanted to give Bnei Yisrael many opportunities to do good deeds, and that's why we have so many mitzvot. Rather than thinking that mitzvot are a negative thing, it's such a burden to have so many mitzvot, exactly the opposite of Chazal tells. Chazal tells the mitzvot are a privilege, because it's through the mitzvot that we are able to achieve merit in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that is the entire purpose of the Ketores, to give another opportunity for mitzvot. And therefore, that's exactly why Hashem puts His presence in our midst. His awe, and we should be in awe of Hashem. Hashem wants us to bring karbanot, nidarim, nidavot, chatot, hashamot, tmidim, musavim l'chapar alehem. And we bring all of these offerings to reestablish our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu when we have distanced ourselves from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the primary purpose of karbanot is l'chapar alehem, to help us achieve atonement so that we can reestablish our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he says, he brings a mashal, the yodesh, he's capital. If a person has sinned, but he can see and know that he has been forgiven, the yodesh unaki, and now he knows that he's been cleansed of that sin. Nizar yoter milachata. He will be more careful the next time not to sin, because he sees how much trouble he has to go through to reestablish that relationship. So he will not filthy himself, dirty himself through sin. However, if a person cannot see tangibly that he's been forgiven for his sin, and once he sins today, tomorrow, and he will think to himself, I'm so far gone, why bother caring anymore? It's too late. I've already lost cause. Therefore, we have to understand the purpose of the whole karbanot is so that people should see in Hashem, the Aish, the fire going up from Hashem, the Ketoret being accepted. Seeing that Hashem is accepting our offerings is a very, very powerful emotional feeling, and it will help keep us from falling into a sense of despair about our ability to again reestablish a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Chazal tell us the same thing. When a person does something more than once, he keeps sinning again, he thinks it's not such a big deal. Ulekach kava kodesh baruch hu Yisrael karbanot litchaper bohem Yom HaKippurim limchilo slicha shelo yagilu et atzmam lechatzaim. That people shouldn't despair and think we're lost and there's no hope for us. Okay. Let's leave the rest. He just gives a mashal, etc., etc. Now, here he says specifically, Shtei Tabot Zahav. For sure, specifically says Shtei Tabot. There are two Tabot, Achat Mikan, V'Achat Mikan. There was one on either side of Mizbach, i.e., there are only two rings holding the two poles. And he specifically says here in Pasuk V'Asnitot Habadim, when you make the poles for this Mizbach, he says Kol Habadim Shel HaMishkan. All the other poles that were in the Mishkan, Hayu Nichnasin Derech Shtei Tabaot, were held in place by two rings. Chutz Mishel Mizbach Haketoret Lefi Shaya Katan. This is the smallest piece of furniture. It was too small to have two rings to hold the pole in place. Each pole was held in place by one ring. Again, remember, with the exception of the Aron, all of the other furniture, the poles were only used for transportation. They were not there when the items were being used in their place. The only exception to that is the Aron, where the Badim were there all the time. Once they were placed in, first time it was constructed, they stayed there forever. And they're still there, wherever the Aron may be. Okay, Orach Chaim. Orach Chaim, very interestingly, he says here, by the way, if you want to know, Tam Shizida calls that Klizak Shel Panim Me'achor, Kol Mishkan V'Avodoso K'Pravi Rashi Parshat Truma. I've already explained in the Parshat Truma why this is out of place. So we're going to get to that right here and go to why. So I'm going back now. This is the Orach Chaim on Parshat Truma. And he explains why is the Mizbach Hazav out of place. So firstly, I got to just get a little background. This Orach Chaim is a very, very long Orach Chaim in Parshat Truma. It covers like 3 pages of text in a much smaller font. And he's basically explaining that the Kalim that were made by Moshe, the menorah, the shulchan, the Aron, were also used in the Beit HaMikdash. The exception to that is the Mizbach HaZahav. The Mizbach HaZahav that Moshe made was not used in the Beit HaMikdash. It's the only piece of furniture that was not used in the Beit HaMikdash. Now, of course, the poles, the krashim that we talked about last week, obviously were not used in the Beit HaMikdash because they had solid stone walls. They had real walls. It was a real building. They didn't need the overhang. They didn't need the curtains. But the furniture, the Mizbeach, as I said, not Mizbeach, the Shulchan, the Menorah, and the Aron were all used in the Beit HaMikdash. However, and how is where the Orach Chaim picks up. Mizbach Hazah, concerning the golden altar, the altar for Ketoret, Matzinu she'asa Shlomo acher, that Shlomo made a new one, the Ganaz l'shel Moshe, and he hid away Moshe's Mizbeach and didn't use it. First, Zal, Shashulchan, V'Menorah, she'asa Moshe yesh b'machloket im hayu b'sedarim u'medlakim. There's one opinion that says that the Shulchan and Menorah that Moshe made were there, they were in the Beit HaMikdash, but Shlomo made 10 other ones. So he used the other ones. He didn't use the ones, Moshe ones were like in the museum. They were the museum pieces. And the others were the daily functioning ones. And there's a machloket about whether, or there's nothing that says, no, he used them. He used it in rotation. He used the Moshe ones in rotation with all the others. That they used them in a rotation. Even though Shlomo made 10 menorah, they didn't light all 10 menorah every day. They lit one each day, and they did it on a rotation basis. So Moshe's was one of the 10. It was part of the rotation, according to one opinion. The other opinion is, what did the Romans? What the Romans schlepped away has nothing to do with Shlomo, because remember, Shlomo's stuff that was built by Shlomo was schlepped away 500 years before the Romans even got there. Okay, it was swept away by Nebuchadnezzar. What happened to it? Great question. Some of the stuff eventually worked its way back to the second Beit HaMikdash, but for the most part, it was probably lost somewhere along the line. Mizbach HaZahav, concerning the altar, the Ketoret altar of Zahav, Davar Muskam, everybody, all of the opinions. Now that's impossible. It's impossible, right? Everybody should agree to something. Call again. Wait, I lost the place here. Davar Muskam, everybody agrees. Shenignas, that it was hidden away. Lo shimshu ela b'shel shlomo, that they used only Shlomo's mizbech, because he didn't make 10 mizbachot, even though he made 10 tables and 10 menorot, he didn't make 10, he made one mizbech, it was used, the one of Moshe's was put away. V'tzorich ladat, lama ganesh Moshe, what was wrong with using Moshe's? Why did he hide Moshe's? Couldn't he keep using Moshe's? What was wrong with it? Happened, didn't wear out, right? What was wrong with it? V'nira, however, it appears to me that Torah ramza hadavar b'ma she'akwa seder mitzvat mizbach hazahav b'makom she'yiroy litzavod olav. The Torah is hinting to the fact that it's not going to be used by Shlomo by moving it out of its place. In other words, it should have been in parshat Truma described. It's not described till the end of parshat Tetzaveh. Ki timsa ki mitchila hitchil ba'aron, because the logical place would have been we start with the aron. Shu pnimi pnimiyim. It's the most innermost piece of furniture. V'yacha kacha kaporet. Then it talks about the kaporet. V'yacha kacha shulchan. Then it talks about the shulchan. V'yacha kacha menorah. Then it talks about the menorah. But we would have expected the next thing to be the mizbech, but it's not. Then it talks about the mishkan, the tent coverings. Then it talks about the krashav, the poles and the amudim, that held it up. The acharav Mizbach Haketoret, and then it talks about mizbech, the outer mizbech. The acharav chatzar mishkan, then it talks about the outer courtyard hangings. The acharav, and then it talks about shemen ubigdei asharet. Talks about the shemen for the menorah, which is the beginning of our parsha. The bigdei asharet la'aron, the begadim that Aaron and his sons wore. Karbanot hachtinuch batzmidim, the karbanot that Aaron and his sons had to bring to go through their initiation. The tamidim, the karban tamid that was brought every day. The achar calls then, only after all of this do we get to the tzivui of the mishpach hazahav. The yesh hargasha gedola b'shinui gedola k'zeh. It's obvious. It's fairly obvious. It slapped us in the face that this is completely out of place. It's been way. Remez b'zeh, and this is to hint. Or Chaim HaKadosh wants to say this is to hint. Shedino mishuna mishel hamishkan v'kelav. It is completely separate from the mishkan and all of the other kelim. Ki hamishkan v'kelav hara'ui lebeit olamim yishamish lebeit olamim. The other parts of the Mishkan that were suitable to be used in the Beit HaMikdash were used in the Beit HaMikdash. Shulchan, HaMenorah, Moshe Katavnu L'Malo, Mishamshim Beit Olamim. Umisha Eino Beit Olamim, things that were not suitable for the Beit HaMikdash, could go in Mishkan, like the Mishkan and Kelim of the things that were held up, the Kelim of the Mishkan, and of course the loops and all the other things. Shaloshim they weren't used in the Beit HaMikdash because they didn't have a need for them. And also the outer Mizbech, they built a new one. They needed a much larger one. They needed a much larger one than the one that was in the Mishkan because there were many more people by that time. Its job didn't change. It still had to bring the same Ketoret. Same amount as we say in Pitum Ketoret every day. How much Ketoret? You brought a chatzi mana b'boker, half a mana in the morning, chatzi mana b'erev, half in the evening. Af al pikein, even so, even though it had the same function in the Beit HaMikdash that it had the Mishkan all these years, lo yishamesh Beit Olamim, it was not to be used in the Beit HaMikdash. Yasa acher, and he made another one, v'gonzo l'chalutin, and it is hidden away forever. Masha lo asa kein b'shulchan u'menorah she'asa Moshe, the mishulchan and the menorah that Moshe made, shegam she'asa asara, even though Shlomo made 10 tables and 10 menorot, shel Moshe oleu kulan, Moshe was still there in the rotation. Binyan remizut ma'aseh beit olam eino ela remez ba'alma. But you shouldn't think this is something that's written. It's only a hint. Okay, final, we get to Kli Yakar. Same question. Okay, before we get to that, you can explain the whole purpose of Mizbach. Why do I need a Mizbach Haketoret in the first place? That's the Kli Yakar's basic question. What is the entire purpose? Kfi HaNirah. Seems to me, Sheshnei HaMizbachot ha'elu. Again, the two Mizbachot, the outer Mizbach, which is the copper one, the inner one, the golden one, which are one is for bringing animals, the other is for bringing Ketoret. Nerchu Shneim lechaper al nefesh hachotet. Their purpose is together. They work together to achieve atonement for somebody who sins. Why? Ki Mizbach HaNechoshet, the outer Mizbeach. The outer Mizbeach comes to achieve atonement for our physical nature of the sin. For our physical body that is sin, needs a physical atonement. That's why, what is the physical atonement? Allah makrim b'alei chayim. We bring animal offerings that are live animals that really we're supposed to be being brought as an act of sacrifice in the place. We know Hashem doesn't want human sacrifice, so we bring an animal in our place. Habayim t'murato, they come in our stead. Ki yesh lem dinyon el chomer hadam, because from a physical perspective, animals are like human beings. Same cell makeup, same proteins make up the cells, very similar construction. Therefore, they, on a physical basis, brought on the physical mizbeach that symbolizes this physical kapara, we get an animal brought, and that's the outer mizbeach. And he brings also its why proof that the mizbeach is the physical, because the komato damsal komato dam benuni shalosh amot. The height of the mizbeach is 3 amot, which is the average height of a person. It's 3 amot. And the animals that we bring are similar to our animal soul, our animalistic instincts. Nefesh tumurat nefesh, one soul in place of a second soul. If somebody doesn't have enough to afford an animal, tumurat nafsho, instead of his soul, he brings only a mincha of soul. Okay. And therefore it's as if he brought a soul. So the first outer mizbeach is to get atonement for the physical part. The soul also requires atonement. Okay, so the outer one is atonement for the body, the physical. However, our spirit, our neshama, also needs an atonement when we sin. Because it's attached to the body, it too has become impurified through this sin that is committed. The eino mitkaperet b'nefesh habehema. The ein dimyon zelazeh. By bringing an animal offering, I cannot achieve atonement for my spiritual side, because the animal has no connection to my spiritual side. It has a connection to my physical side because we're similar in our physical makeup, but there is no connection in an animal to the spiritual side. Ki ruach b'nei ha'adam ha'olah l'mal ruach ha'be'ema yoredet lamata. As we say in Kohelet, that we see that the spirit of Adam is a very different spirit than the spirit of the animals. V'ech yiti ha'nefesh ha'be'ema ha'kala v'nifsad t'murat l'nishmat Adam ha'kayemet l'netzach. How can the soul of an animal, or the spirit of an animal, which is not eternal, when the animal dies, that's it. It's finished. There is no olam haba for animals. At least that's what Carr wants to tell us. Don't tell that to any of your pet owners. They'll get crazy, but that's a whole different story. Nonetheless, since the animal nefesh is something that is temporary, it's finite, how can that be given as an atonement for the soul of a person which is eternal? Al kain, therefore, tziva el chai lasot Mizbach Haketoret. Therefore, we need the Mizbach Haketoret, hamaleh ashon, whose entire product that it brings up is the smoke and the smell, the reach nichoach, and the smell, lashem lechaper al ruach b'nei ha'adam ha'olahi lamala kashan haketoret. Just like the smoke rises, so too our neshama are supposed to rise. We're supposed to always be elevating ourselves spiritually. And through bringing this Ketoret, again, collectively, not individually, we collectively elevate everybody's neshama. And it also symbolizes the smelling, the sweet fragrance of doing good deeds. And therefore, we have this whole thing, remez, l'neshama, dakom, inadak, shtircham, hikapara, telaloto, elmokom, chotzva. Okay. And again, we see also because it's smaller, it's not as tall, it's not as big. Okay, and let's see. We have one more thing at the end. Okay. So basically, the Kar wants to tell us that actually we need 2 mizbachot, one for a physical atonement, the other for a spiritual atonement. And again, if we think about the fact that Ketoret is really much more the smell rather than for the physicality of sprinkling blood on the Mizbach, etc., we understand that each of these different levels of why the Mizbach Haketoret is needed, but also more so why it's in a different place than all the rest of the furnishings. In other words, this is here because it is totally separate from the entire purpose of all the rest of the Mishkan is there, at least to bring atonement for our bodies. This is alone in that it's to bring atonement for the neshama. So again, I hope that we've got a little bit of the taste as to why this parsha is out of order, because that's something that's always bothered me as well. I just wondered why is this parsha here, not back where it belongs. So these are some of the things the parsha didn't give us, and I hope that we should be zocha to once again see all of these wonderful things and be able to rebuild the Beit Hamikdash, when we should be zocha to Gula Shlema. Thank you all. I open it up now for questions, comments, and feedback at this point. Anybody have any questions? Okay, if nobody has any questions or comments, I will say have a good rest of the week. Shabbat Shalom, rest of the week, good week, and Han Bez Hashem, we'll see you all next week, same time, same station. Laila Tov.